hearing. This is hearing stream 7. So we're just halfway through the total number of hearings, which is 13. And by the end of May this year, we'll have wrapped up all the hearings. My name's David McMahon, and start with a karakia to welcome us all in for today. If we could all stand.
Mai iti kai monga raro ki te tai. Mai iti awa tonga raro ki te awa raki. Tēnei taha kore, awhi ai taratahi. Whanau, haere mai te toki. Me hui tai hui.
Thank you, everyone. Just for the record, this is, as I said, hearing stream 1. Hearing stream 7, day 1 of 1. And this is the first section of that hearing. Can I just take the opportunity to ask my fellow panel members to introduce themselves? Starting on my left.
Yep. Kia ora tātou, ko Robin Cherry Campbell, toko ingoa, ko Tararoa te moanga, ko Mangatarere te awa, no Taratahi aho, tēnā koutou katoa.
Kia
ora, everybody. I'm Brian Della, Commissioner and Carlton District Councillor.
Kia ora koutou katoa, ko Kiriana Naira Sims, toka ingoa, he uri o Wairarapa. Kia ora.
Koutou, ko Terry Hayes toko ingoa, e te uri ahau o Wairarapa, a mema o te iwi o Rangitane. Kia ora.
Alice for myself, Wairarapa District Council.
Kia ora, Brian Jefferson, representing South Wairarapa District Council.
Kia ora, Fraser Marman, Commissioner, Master District Council.
I am Master.
Thank you, everybody. Just for the record, David McMahon. I'm the independent chair of this hearings panel. I'm a planning practitioner based in Wellington these days, and involved in a whole range of resource management issues over the last 30 years. Perhaps we could just hear from the officers, starting with Wesley.
Good morning. Hamish Wesley, reporting officer for the energy topic today.
And Kate Treadaway, reporting officer for the network utilities topic.
And Ruth, just want to introduce yourself?
I'm the hearings administrator.
Thank you, Ruth. And just for the record, the back row, the front row of the back row, starting with the lady in the yellow. Thank you, Alice.
And I'm Becca Adams, planner at Carlton District Council.
Thank you. Thank you, Christine. Ma'am?
On submission.
Yes, that's fine. It's
Rachel.
Welcome.
I'm just an observer.
Okay.
I'm Peter Isaac, Chairman of SWAG, South Wairarapa.
Welcome, Peter. We'll be hearing from you and your colleagues after the afternoon tea adjournment. Thank you for sitting in this morning. Okay. I understand that Solitaire Robinson is on leave today. She's the author of that part of the Section 42A report dealing with Transpower submissions. And the reason is that there's potential conflict, and to avoid that conflict, the officers, Ms. Wesley and Ms. Treadaway have delegated that responsibility to an independent planner, being Ms. Robertson. And I understand, Becca, you'll be conveying any of the issues that arise today to Solitaire.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Okay. Well, the way this morning will work is that we'll hear firstly from Mr. Wesley in relation to the
Christine.
Just take the microphone off.
Yeah, all good.
Okay, thank you. Always in technology.
Blaming on the technology.
So we'll hear from Mr. Wesley first on the energy chapter, and then from Ms. Treadaway on the network utilities. Both officers have prepared a section 42A report, but they've also helpfully produced a summary statement which outlines the key issues that are still outstanding as of today. During the presentation, we'll ask them to take us through how the new chapters work in terms of the objectives, policies, rules and standards, so that we have a reasonable understanding of those. So we can ask questions of them and submitters based on the. So unless there's any other matters arising, any procedural matters? No? Mr. Wisney, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If you're happy, I'm happy to take the first 3 paragraphs as read in terms of standard information. Statement covers.
Yes.
And then starting from section 2, the overview of the energy topic and the operative district plan. The operative district plan contains 1 objective and 7 underlying policies that address energy. The direction seeks to encourage energy efficiency and generation of energy from renewable sources. The rules enable meteorological stations and masts and the maintenance, operation and minor upgrade of existing renewable electricity generation. All other renewable electricity generation requires consent as a discretionary activity.
Yes. How would you categorise the flavour of the operative district plan in terms of the way it provides for enables energy activities?
I'll describe it as a typical first generation district plan in the sense renewable energy at the time was seen a few of the wind farm proposals and developments further north in Palmerston North and Tararua. But at the time it was recognised as there was potential in the Wairarapa, but it was very much a general approach to the provision. So, for example, the meteorological stations and masts rules, they're the network utility rules.
Okay.
So there was no bespoke investigation equipment rule like there is in the proposed plan. With my last line there, basically all types of renewable energy, electricity generation, whatever type, whatever scale, requires resource consent as a discretionary activity. It didn't matter whether it was a single solar panel through to multiple solar panels or a single wind turbine or hundreds of wind turbines. Every application needed consent.
Yes. Okay, thank you for that.
And then so through the district plan review, the energy provisions concluded that there were a few implementation issues with the current provisions. And just to highlight, that implementation issue was the one size fits all, that everything was treated the same. In addition, through changing demand for different forms of renewable electricity generation and new technology, additional resource management issues have been identified that did not exist at the time the operative plan was developed. So the National Policy Statement for Renewable Electricity Generation 2011 was also introduced following the release of the operative plan.
What can you tell the panel about the flavour of the MPF REG?
Objective, it's a nationwide objective. It's to the government's goal of renewable electricity generation. Come to shortly, and I think it's covered in evidence of the energy companies, is it's to double the amount of renewable electricity generated by 2050.
Okay.
In the proposed plan, it contains a standalone energy chapter with a purpose and content to provide an integrated framework for electricity generation. The provisions enable smaller scale renewable electricity generation, including small scale domestic and community scale, while continuing to require a consent process for large scale renewable electricity generation, with discretion to consider all relevant effects. Provisions also seek to better recognise the benefits of renewable electricity generation, supporting the transition to a low carbon future. And in Appendix 2 of the statement, and a table listing the activity status comparing the operative and plans for different types of generation. I'd like to go to Appendix 3, please. Harrison. Installation, maintenance, repair, upgrade and removal of facility, adding a site. The operative plan, there are no specific rules, but they would be permitted by the utility rules, which enable poles and masts up to about 20 metres in the rural zone. Where under proposed plan, there's a specific rule investigation equipment which relates to the size and scale and duration of that activity. And then similarly with the operation, maintenance, repair and removal of existing renewable electricity generation, there is a specific rule in the operative plan that manages existing facilities, with the Haunui wind farm south of Martinborough being the only one at the time. And that really restricts the maintenance and minor upgrading to just continuing the existing operation as it is. No increase in scale or size of that facility. And then you can see the distinct difference then between the remaining rows in the table, where the proposed plan introduces specific activity status, enabling small scale as permitted.
You talk about upgrade, and you talked a lot about the upgrade there, and I'm really interested in that. And how the submitters have basically said an upgrade could involve an increase of up to 50% in size and area and so on.
Correct.
To me, that's hardly an upgrade, that's an expansion. I would have thought. Have you had conversations with them about that? And with obviously we'll ask Christine about this, which comes on as well. But
yep, no, I have. So I had informal discussions with them preparing for this, and I think their view of an upgrade and my view of an upgrade is different in terms of the scale of an upgrade. Yeah, the 50% Meridian put in their submission, to me that's a significant expansion. An upgrade, and where the current operative plan refers to a minor upgrade, effectively it's making improvements to the efficiency, but it does expansion. Correct.
Well, that would be my understanding of what an upgrade means.
Yeah, we'll come on to this on page 3 of the summary statement.
Yep.
Yeah, so that's probably the key difference between the operative plan and the proposed plan is the 3 scales of activity, and just in terms of the definition of small scale. So that's to service the generation that's basically primarily used on site for the activity. May still connect to the grid uses on site. Where the community scale, it's to service the local community. The classic example is one of, say, Ngawi or a coastal settlement where there might be a turbine or sets of solar panels that primarily supply that local settlement, being the community, but it may also be connected to the grid where any surplus or can be exported to the grid, where large scale, its primary purpose is to generate to input into the grid, not used locally, even though it feeds into the grid, so it would be locally in some way, but there's a different, that's the distinguishing between the three types.
And all 3 are subject to definitions.
Correct.
Yes. And
I've just precede those definitions.
Would I also come in under community if there's?
Yes, I could be either small scale or community, depending on probably the scale of the generation and the scale of the community. If it would say just servicing a wharenui or something like that, it might be considered small scale. The Marae complex with Papapanga and other houses, that's probably getting up to the community scale. Top of page 2 then. There were 35 original submissions, 217 submission points, 10 further submissions with 303 further submission points received on the energy chapter and the associated definitions. Submissions were a mix of support and opposition to the provisions in the energy chapter, sought to enable or restrict renewable electricity generation. The submissions on the energy chapter and associated definitions related to clarification and consistent use of terms relating to renewable electricity generation activities throughout the proposed plan. Requests to introduce additional policies, controls or standards managing the location, scale and nature of renewable electricity generation activities. Requests to require the public notification or limited notification to neighbours of proposed renewable electricity generation activities. request to recognise the operational and functional needs of renewable electricity generation activities, which includes various amendments to the policies, rules and standards, and then clarification of the relationship between the energy chapter and other chapters in the proposed plan. Just on that last point, I haven't covered in the introduction is just that relationship between the energy provisions and how they relate to the zone chapters and the other district-wide chapters, being some of the overlays, whether it's flood hazards or outstanding landscape. So where it's other district-wide chapters, such as the overlay ones, you would have to comply with the rules in the energy chapter, as well as what's in the overlay chapters. If you were proposing to put a wind farm in the rural zone, but also within an outstanding natural landscape, you'd have to comply with the rules for the outstanding landscape, as well as what rules applied for the energy activity.
Yes, but the zone rules are largely trumped by the energy chapter itself. It's the district-wide rules that need to also be complied with.
Yeah, the zone rules are silent on energy activities. It's fully covered in the energy chapter. Section 4, I've read the respective evidence of Christine Foster on behalf of Meridian Energy, Richard Matthews on behalf of Genesis Energy, and Remo Bangi on behalf of the Greater Wellington Regional Council. I'll respond to this evidence below. And I acknowledge both support and opposition to the recommendations from the parties who have pre-circulated their responses. I also note I have read the pre-circulated documents from Elizabeth Creevy, Frank Van Stencil, as listed below. I'll take that list of documents if you're happy to take that as read. I have not responded to these documents as there is no supporting evidence outlining their relevance or applicability to this mission. I'll respond to this information after hearing from these submitters at the hearing.
Thank you.
So then what I've done, because there's similarities in the evidence of Ms Foster and Mr Matthews, I've grouped them together and then got with Bangi's evidence separately because it raises a different matter. Ms Foster and Mr Matthews support several of the recommendations to retain or amend the provisions to better provide for renewable electricity activity. In the evidence, they propose further amendments to various policies, rules and standards. I agree with most of the amendments in their respective evidence for the reasons outlined in their evidence. And I've listed in the next section of the statement those amendments support. However, there are three matters that seek further information to better understand the benefits and costs of the amendment sought. And so these are Energy Standard 1, investigations. Foster and I have a difference of opinion on the permitted duration for investigation equipment. The proposed plan, as notified, has a maximum permitted duration of 5 years, and Meridian Energy and Ms Foster seek a 10-year duration. I consider a 10-year duration as too long, particularly for tall wind monitoring masts up to 90 metres in height, due to their potential visual and landscape effects.
Hamish, this 90-metre mast in the general zone, has there been any consideration given to the significant hazard that poses to agricultural aircraft going about business?
Not specifically in the plan. Might be a question for Ms Foster and Mr Matthews and any Meridian or Genesis people there, but my understanding they'd have to comply with any civil aviation requirements in terms of any lighting or the location in terms of flight paths or takeoff or approach for various airstrips. So I imagine I anticipate that would be there'll be civil aviation requirements depending on the location and height.
We'll take that up with Ms Foster. Thank you. Great. Just before you move off Standard 1, obviously hear from Foster on this matter. If this is a permitted activity standard, isn't it? So what's the default activity status if the applicant wishes to have a period greater than 5 years?
Restricted discretionary.
Okay.
And I've recommended some amendments to those matters of discretion in response to Ms Foster's evidence, which I agree with, to delete two of the matters of discretion.
So if we go to Rule 1, is that the one?
Hamish,
Hang on, Brian, just before you do. What are the changes that you?
So in the original, in response to submissions, added in reference to functional need and operational need of the station equipment.
Yes.
As a relevant factor, and also the effects on any overlays being outstanding natural features.
Yes.
And then in response to Ms Foster's evidence, I've recommended deletion of the suitability of the site because that's covered by the functional operational needs ones.
Sorry, Brian, I just
you just answered it.
okay.
Same with health and safety, that's not a specific, it's something that the installer of the investigation equipment would consider themselves. It's not something the councils would need to consider.
Okay.
And then because of the small size, the actual loss of highly productive land is minimal. So it's not worth assessing.
There's no guidance in the proposed plan about how such applications would be processed. Notification.
Correct.
Okay. Be determined on its merits.
Correct. And to me, that's appropriate, given that in most cases these are relatively small structures, apart from potentially the tall wind monitoring masts.
Yes. Again, sorry, just before you push on, rule 1, and it also appears in rule 4 and a number of rule 5. The addition of a new clause A, which provides a carve out for areas of natural character, outstanding features, landscapes, SASMs and SNAs from the permitted activity status. Where does the scope for that come from?
I'll double check that the Meridian Energy submission. Double check.
There an oversight in the application of the plan that those caveats for those 4 overlays weren't listed?
Potentially, actually, potentially, and this is how do the two district-wide chapters, the overlay chapters and the energy chapter, relate to each other.
Okay.
As I said earlier, you'd still need to comply with the rules in the overlay chapters. Making it explicit. So sorry, it's in response to a forest and bird submission that those exclusions were added for those areas.
So presumably an introduction to the district plan under the heading how the plan works. That intention was made clear. Correct. When you came to the energy chapter, it wasn't as explicit as it could have been.
Yes, and forest and bird sought to have the relationship made clearer, but also how the individual rules applied to those circumstances.
Yes.
Yeah, concern was that particular activities are inherently incompatible or could have effects that are incompatible with those overlay areas.
Yes.
So their submission sought to make it specific in the energy chapter that those areas were excluded, which I support.
And what about rule 4, which is the community scale renewable electricity definition of other overlays different to the ones we've just talked about, more in terms of the Martinborough Soils Overlay heritage schedule and the heritage precinct, so schedules 1 and 2.
Yeah, so similar reasons, but from other submitters seeking to make sure that relationship in those sensitive areas.
Yes,
there's a specific.
Can you recall the submitter or submitters?
Greytown Heritage Trust.
You can come back to me if you like. Yeah, same applies to rule six, I think. Yeah, rule 5, sorry. And the new rule RX that we're talking about would in relation to the natural features, natural character and SMA.
Check that and come back.
Thank you. Sorry, where were you at? You're at
15B.
Right, especially on 15A. I'm just reading the evidence from Christine, and her evidence is she doesn't agree with you. That's the end of it. But I'm really interested in why you're making your comment on potential visual and landscape effects. What do you know, we're talking about a monitoring tower, aren't we, of some of it. We're not talking about a wind turbine to assess the effect of the wind turbine, are we? We're talking about
It's either a thin pole structure or a lattice structure, the one I've seen, and because it's up to 90 metres in height, that could be that could have significant effects, because that's, while it's slender, its height is significant at that height with not something that you'd anticipate being up for long periods of time.
Did you at all discuss the length of time that monitoring needs to take place to get some?
Yep. So that's
what was the conclusion that came to in that discussion with Christine?
It's variable, and this is based on similar rules, processes in other locations where my understanding is 3 to 5 years is typically for wind. Is the typical length of monitoring to do it, depending on what happens with the climate over that period of time. It may or may not give the data, and so a longer period obviously gives a better data set.
And so, and I'll obviously ask Christine when she comes on, what was her argument to say, well, we need 10 years? Because there is no argument except to say, I don't agree with you.
Yep. My understanding is, in her view, is that because the structures are so small, that and for wind masts normally they're in high elevated locations, well away from people, that their effects are minimal. So 5 years.
So there was no scientific or otherwise evidence presented to you that would say this is why we want 10 years.
Yes, well, that's basically a difference in our professional opinions about the types of structures and magnitude of the effects. 5 years or 10 years, that's one of those arbitrary ones. It's a judgment one, and that's what talking to the council officers about other structures that have been already put up in the Wairarapa and that sort of thing. Where are they? What are they? And it is a judgment of how long it's appropriate as of right, and then when should an assessment be. And to me, 5 years, understanding long enough to monitoring record.
Yeah.
But obviously, a longer record gives a longer time period for the amount of data.
Thank you.
We'll take that out with Ms. Foster. With the Castle Hill Wind Farm and the Anui, are you aware of the wind monitoring masts that were being erected in relation to those?
Not those two specific ones. No, don't know the details.
Okay. One, we'll take that up. 15B.
The Energy Rule 6 for large-scale renewable electricity generation activities or upgrade of existing large-scale renewable electricity generation activities. Ms. Foster and Mr. Matthews' discretionary activity status for upgrading existing large-scale renewable electricity generation activities, as they consider it as too onerous consenting requirement. They consider the activity status for upgrading should be permitted, subject to standards as appropriate. Meridian Energy sought the following standards in their submission, being replacement or relocated structures within 100 metres of the existing location. The height of any existing pole or support structure is not increased by more than 50%. The diameter or width of an existing pole or support structure is not increased by more than 50%. And the area of any existing above ground structure is not increased by more than 25%. And that the upgraded structure is not located within any identified areas of significance, so basically within any overlays. So while I consider providing for upgrading of these as permitted activity would be efficient, consider the magnitude of the scale of increase sought could result in adverse effects which may not be effectively avoided, remedied or mitigated. Permitted activities would also not enable assessment of any changes in the environment, such as other consideration of other renewable electricity generation activities that may have established and the cumulative effects of these activities. And then for context, I've summarised the magnitude. So for context, I've summarised the magnitude of this increase in the table below for 2 wind farms in Wairarapa. For these reasons, I continue to recommend discretionary activity status for upgrading.
Will there be some questions on that? Anyone want to kick off for me? Yeah, Alistair.
Okay. So I asked the questions before about that, but you've already answered that. What is the stop? There doesn't seem to be any time frame of an upgrade. So if they upgraded this year, could they then upgrade in 5 years' time? So add another 100 metres and so on and so forth. So where's the limits on this from what they're proposing?
In theory, that's understanding thinking that would provide for incremental upgrades over time.
That's hardly an upgrade, that's actually an expansion plan.
Yeah, but from my experience, that these are very large scale facilities, and that so you wouldn't necessarily do incremental upgrades. You're not going to replace one wind turbine this year with another turbine in 5 years just because of the costs involved for doing that. So I see it's probably a low risk of incremental upgrades for wind farms or wind turbines. May be different for solar because of the nature, and I'm not sure these provisions that Meridian sought are very much tailored towards wind farms or wind turbines. Not sure how you'd apply them in a solar farm context to solar panels. So yeah, to me, there's a question mark in my mind around what would be appropriate parameters for solar as well.
And then the other question that I've got on sort of that incremental thing is if you upgrade, and I'm playing devil's advocate a little bit here, saying, okay, I'm going to upgrade that wind turbine. Does that mean I have to demolish that wind turbine to upgrade it, or I'm just saying, well, I'm upgrading that. That's no longer suitable. I'm going to replace it out there. And once I replace it out there, I go, oh, I can actually use that site again. So
yeah,
I think that's expansion. That's not upgrade.
To me, that's one of the questions around the parameters. To me, you wouldn't be able to replace, let's say, a single turbine with 2 turbines. That to me is not an upgrade. Upgrade is how the current district plan defines it. Basically, it's the efficiency of improving the efficiency of the activity.
And I suppose the last one, 50% increase in turbine or blade height is quite significant, I would have thought, given that somewhat of the length of these blades, 50 metres as they are. So the environmental impact on, dare I say, bird life and so on and so forth, wouldn't have been assessed. So how would they manage that risk if those upgrades?
Those are the sort of questions in my mind as well. And for context, it's not too far away to look at Palms North on the Tararua Ranges and the upgrades, or the repowering is another term I've heard used of those the first turbines that were installed there is starting to happen. So it's replacing the smaller lattice towers with taller ones. So and to me they're of a magnitude of a size a lot larger than what was originally consented. So to me there's a potential for a wide range of different effects, whether it's effects on birds, whether it's noise or visual or landscape.
Wesley, we're obviously going to have a number of questions from Ms. Foster on this recommended submission matter. Before we do, though, I've got 3 questions for you. In terms of the knowledge or opposition to the relief being sought, in terms of the 5 standards that have been listed, are there any particular ones that you want to comment on in terms of their suitability or their ability to enforce them or comply with them?
I think they're all, from my perspective, they're all enforceable and measurable in terms of they're certain, in terms of they've got a metric, so you can compare the existing and measure it to the proposed. So I think they work from that perspective. I think each of them raises questions in my mind about the effects that could arise from them. So, for example, the replacement or relocated structures with 100 metres of the existing location. So one of the ones I'm thinking is if it's going 100 metres closer to a neighbour's dwelling, what's the noise effects from or visual effects from that neighbour, where it might be partly obscured by a hill or something at the moment, where 100 metres closer, that could have that 100 metres further away, maybe okay, but that metrics, there's a range of things there.
I suppose that's an example of what would have gone through the original consenting process. Say, yes, you could put it there because it doesn't affect the neighbour, but if you move it now, all of a sudden you're going beyond what the original consent had looked at.
And one Foster will probably elaborate more than I can on this, but I understand there's difference in the approach to consenting wind farms now. When Haunui got consented, there were specific points identified. This is a specific precise location of where we're putting turbines. We're now, because the investigations are ongoing for the wind farms, and for example, we need to do the geotesting for the specific location, they consent an envelope of where those turbines could be located. So anywhere within a 50-metre wide envelope, so I'll say along top of a ridgeline, that's where the turbines could be located. So where do you measure that 100 metres from? Is that 100 metres from the consented envelope, even though let's say the wind turbine gets built right in the middle of the envelope? Is it 100 metres from the built location, or is it 100 metres from that consented envelope where they could have built any of the turbines within that? Yes, 100 metres from that envelope because they're allowed to. Their consent allows them to. So there's just some clarification there on the location one.
That's useful stuff. My second question, is the rule is notified. We're talking about R6, aren't we? Yes, R6. Lists large scale renewable generation activities or upgrades as a discretionary activity. We're asking for permitted activities subject to standards. Have you given any consideration to alternatives, both in terms of changes to the metrics or content of the standards to maintain permitted activity status, or a change in activity status somewhere between permitted and discretionary that also be efficient, but will feed? Have you given any consideration to those two alternatives?
Not specifically. The only one in front of us has been the submission from Meridian with these metrics, and so there could be variable metrics between 0 and where Meridian have sought them, which may have different levels of acceptability from an effects perspective, and also from the energy company's perspective about what gives them the ability to do upgrades in the future. Another alternative I have given consideration to is what's in the operative plan, which is a definition of what upgrade means, and so that's more of a descriptive rather than metric-based approach, where it talks about it's improving the efficiency, the scale, the activity in terms of the size of the components isn't increased.
Yes. Okay. Those alternatives, is that something that might be usefully discussed in conferencing?
Yes, no, very much so.
And is it both Meridian and Genesis that have raised this issue, Mr. Foster and Mr. Matthew? Ms. Foster and Mr. Matthew?
The two submitters.
Okay. We'll take that up with those two. And the final matter is, and it's not really a question, just a comment, and that is obviously there's been a focus on wind farm in terms of this renewable energy, but how would no sort of indication how this would apply to solar farm?
Correct. Yeah, that's something I unfortunately discussed with Ms. Foster, and she said obviously Meridian's interests were in wind in the Wairarapa and other areas, but also solar in other parts of the country. So they hadn't turned their mind, from my understanding, to that. But Ms. Foster and Meridian may have given some thought to that since I spoke.
Yes. Presumably it would be possible to distinguish between solar farms and wind farms, and if there was a agreed track to go down in terms of alternatives.
Correct.
Yep.
And then there's one existing hydro station in the Wairarapa as well, which potentially would also need to,
Okay.
even though.
So has Genesis or Meridian embarked on solar farms yet? I know the private ones have been, some have been conceived, some are obviously going through environment court. But they done any large scale?
From my understanding, Meridian have elsewhere in the country, so have consented.
Then they've got some views on this, obviously.
Yes, we'll take that up with Mr. Foster, but I understand there's been some in Central Otago, Southland.
Far north.
Yes. Okay, sorry for the interruptions, but I think it takes us to D.
Point D. So same
Rule 6.
same rule.
Yes.
Different method though, same rule. Mr. Matthews seeks the activity status of discretionary activity applies to all zones and not non-complying in zones apart from general residential and multi-purpose zone. I agree with Mr. Matthews that the nature and type of some renewable electricity generation activities may be in keeping with some zones, such as the general industrial zone. However, in other zones, such as the general residential zone and natural open space zone, I consider the typical characteristics of large-scale renewable electricity generation activities inconsistent with other activities, character and amenity values of these zones. I consider the different activity status signals the different expectations for this type of activity. For these reasons, I continue to recommend retaining non-complying status for all zones apart from general and multi-purpose.
Yes, two questions arising very quickly. The Murray purpose zone, presumably because it's essentially in the interim a rural zone.
Principally, and that's where it's principally applied as rural locations.
And I've got the second question. Yes. What's the, as a non-complying activity, what would be in the other zones, what would be the policy direction for large-scale renewable electricity generations in those other zones?
It would vary, and this my comment in middle sentences there, say the general industrial zone, where larger utilitarian structures are anticipated. So it may be more compatible with other activities and the type of structures you'd expect in the industrial zone, compared to the natural open space zone, which talks about having minimal amounts of structures with predominance of vegetation over. So that's where when you look at the policies for the zones.
Would P4 be the most relevant policy?
The energy?
Large-scale renewable electricity generation activities?
Yes, as well as zone policy.
How does that operate, given that the zone rules at least are nurtured by the zone policy still have a life?
I think you'd consider them in terms of the context for the different environment.
Presumably policies like P4 would take primacy.
Yes.
Okay. So a large-scale renewable generation activity in a non-rural, non-industrial zone. So let's say an industrial zone. What would be the relevant policies if we would need to consider the sub-policies in P4?
You'd consider them all, in my view, in terms of energy P4. They'd all be relevant, except for maybe the productive land points.
Do you think there's a consenting pathway for those zones?
Yes, but it would depend on the nature of the proposal and nature and scale of the proposal, depending on that. And that's where my comment is that for the general industrial zone, probably more likely to enable a consenting pathway in that zone compared to say the natural open space zone.
We might take that up with Mr. Matthews. I don't think Mr. Foster has pursued that matter. Okay. Clause 16.
Primary raised in the predicted evidence of Remo Bangi a gap in the proposed plan in managing the effects of renewable electricity generation activities on Indigenous biodiversity and on areas of high, very high and outstanding natural character. As Ms. Bangi notes, hearing 6, the hearing panel directed expert conferencing on Eco Policy 4 and Eco Policy 6 to recognise the exemptions of those activities in the National Policy Statement for Indigenous Biodiversity, while having regard to the Regional Policy Statement, Policy 24D, as Ms. Bangi notes, and as I note in the Indigenous Biodiversity Reply Statement prepared last week, this expert conferencing has not yet occurred and its outcome is unknown. However, efforts been made to hold this conferencing prior to the energy hearing, provide an update now. So still hasn't been able to be held, unfortunately, just availability of the 5 people involved in that conference, but we have had a few emails trying to reach agreement on that, but at this point we're waiting on two responses to.
Could you just remind the panel who the parties are? Greater Wellington.
The Greater Wellington, Meridian Energy, Genesis Energy, Transpower New Zealand, and the Department of Conservation.
Yes. And DOC, sorry.
Yes, Department of Conservation.
Oh, yes, yes, okay. Now, this is a similar issue that's Ms. Treadaway's reported on for network utilities also, isn't it?
Yes.
Are the parties, are the telcos involved in the latter matter?
No, I think that's the same parties.
Okay.
And that's the question I've put to them. It's for renewable electricity generation and for electricity transmission as well, whether there should be separate policies or a combined policy.
How does engineer P4 relate to that? Just I'm reading P4 F5. It literally talks about adverse effects on natural features, landscapes, biodiversity, heritage, and sites. All right. So aren't you covering or linking to that anyway in that policy?
Yes.
And so what is the problem? I'm not really understanding where the problem is here, where you've covered the very issues that have been raised by Greater Wellington Regional Council. Paragraph F5, yep. I would have thought.
In a general sense, yes. But in the ecosystems chapter, where it's an identified significant natural area, and so they're proposing to put a wind turbine within a significant natural area and proposing to do vegetation clearance to construct that turbine. That would trigger the rules under the ecosystems chapter for vegetation clearance. So at the moment, we need to assess the ecosystem chapter policies. And at the moment, those policies have an avoidance policy on the effects on the biodiversity. And so that's where the energy companies.
This one, which have regard to it.
Correct.
So do we need to then?
So you've got the ecosystem chapters.
Yeah, they'll make the link stronger between the two.
And the energy companies, their evidence on the ecosystems chapter was that avoid policy was too strong and it would be too restrictive on constructing, establishing renewable electricity generation and electricity transmission in those locations. Maybe good reasons for them to.
Okay, so now we've got an avoid policy on one chapter and in regard to in another chapter. How do you propose to fix that?
So that's the conferencing. That's the heart of the conferencing. How do you?
Where do you stand on that?
Our position, it has been that you need to look at them together, but there needs to be some recognition for the circumstances where avoidance isn't possible, and that's the subject of the mediation, so the subject of the conferencing.
Yeah. Yeah. But that's the point, isn't it? One chapter says avoid and one says remedy and mitigating or whatever. So the two chapters are not talking to each other.
Correct. That's the heart of the conferencing. Is it still an avoid? And if it is, then the renewable electricity generations or transmission may not be able to locate in those locations because of the avoid policy. Or if we come to a different position through the conferencing, there might be a way that it's avoid except in these circumstances.
So I'm sort of struggling with this from the officer's point of view. You've recommended avoid in one chapter, and in this chapter you're recommending avoid, remedying or mitigate. So, as the drafter of these chapters, your chapters are not even linked together.
That's an avoid in where there's identified areas and they have significant values. So that's where in the energy chapter, it's the assessing the effects generally where the areas have not been avoided. Have not been identified. So, for example, there might be a site of significance which is identified in the district plan at this point in time. But through the assessments done by the proponent of the wind farm or the solar farm, they identified another site of significance to Māori within their project area. Then you'd have regard to this policy here in the energy chapter, because it's not a specifically identified site in the district plan.
Little bit of work to be done, I think. And I know that the MPSIB does recognise certain exemptions for activities in terms of, I think it was eco policies P4 and P5, P6 that conflict was originally aimed at. So when I mean, obviously there's an intent to conference. When do you realistically when do you think that might happen, and when would that be reported back?
I'd like to think within the next 2 weeks that it's definitely before the reply could even be part of my statement for this hearing.
That would be useful. We'd certainly encourage all the parties to do that. I know it's been a difficult lead up to the first 2 months of the year with different public holidays and taking advantage of the good weather belatedly. So, but yes, if we could encourage that to happen in time for your right of reply, that would be useful. Okay. Want to just summarise sections 5 and 6?
Yes. So paragraph 17. Actually, I'll read it out in full because I think there's some of the detail of the amendments that I agree with from the evidence. They're probably important to understand the changes. So in terms of the recommended amendments in response to the pre-circulated evidence on the energy chapter, the introductory text, amend by adding reference to the New Zealand Climate Strategy 2024 and the goal of doubling renewable energy generation by 2050 to provide recognition of this national strategy. Objective 1, amend by adding the protection of renewable electricity generation activities from reverse sensitivity, the issue of reverse sensitivity. A simple grammatical correction. Policy 4, amend by reverting to the original wording of provide large-scale renewable generations and add reference to function operational needs to clarify the application of this policy. Standard 1, that one about earlier.
Yes.
And then in terms of maintenance, amend by adding words to describe what constitutes maintenance to clarify its meaning. Making clarification amendments to those two definitions.
Just before you leave that, going back to the definition of upgrade, we focus solely on renewable electricity generation here. There are other definitions of upgrade in relation to the network utilities too.
So it's the same definition. Just making sure it applies to both renewable and to network utilities and using the correct terms. So then to finish, paragraph 18, based on the matters raised in submissions and the pre-circulated expert evidence, the following key matters remain in contention to be considered during this hearing. Whether a series of additional rules, standards or requirements be added to the proposed plan to manage renewable electricity generation activities, particularly solar farms. Whether more stringent activity status should apply to large-scale renewable electricity generation activities located on scheduled sites or within overlays. Whether the objective and policy should be more enabling or restrictive of renewable electricity generation activities, and whether the investigation equipment should have a longer permitted duration period, 5 to 10 years.
Thank you, Mr. Wesley. Just looking at the track change version for the revisions, both the blue and red text. Can you just explain Eng R6, sorry, RX, that's both new rules panel. Who's requested that and what it would achieve?
That's a request from Genesis Energy, and effectively it's copy and paste from this chapter. So that rule in the proposed plan is notified. The battery energy storage systems was located in the net utilities chapter. Genesis submitted said they consider it better located in the energy chapter, related to storage of energy, which I agree with. So I think details are the same as what's in the utilities chapter. It's literally a cut and paste.
Yes.
The exception of the
is it a replacement or a duplication?
Placements. Need to be deleted from the chapter.
And what typically what are these battery energy storage systems?
So they're normally part of a solar farm or a wind farm now. So it's the best description I've heard, and a probably a simple way of explaining it is a series of shipping containers. They're shipping large 40-foot container or 20-foot shipping container. Some of them are actual shipping containers, but they're similar sized to those to a shipping container, where they're basically a series of containers or buildings of that size lined up against each other, depending on the amount of battery storage inside them.
This is battery energy storage systems not enclosed by a building.
Yes, so that's where they'd be. The componentry would be open to the elements.
Okay.
And that's so, for example, a shipping container would be example. No, it wouldn't be an example exit.
No.
But with all the equipment's open to the elements.
Okay. And so what's the equivalent one where it's enclosed? Is that
there isn't one that would be
there's one in the utilities chapter though.
Oh,
come back to you on that.
Yeah. Yeah. Any further questions, panel?
I've probably just got one. Right. Yeah, Hamish, there's nothing in battery storage systems, nothing about extinguishing of fire or any requirements for prevention of fire. As I know that these type of battery installations are not easy to extinguish. There's nothing in there.
I'll come back to you on that as well. My first thought is that that's covered by the building code, and that normally has fire safety, but it requires building consent and it's within the building. So I'll come back to you on what outdoor battery storage systems require for firefighting, because it might be a relevant consideration for the plan.
Thank you for that. And Mr. Wesner, you're keeping a list of any questions that we're seeking a follow-up on. Panel, anything further before we take our tea adjourn?
No, I'm all good.
Yes, I'm right on time, making good time. 10 o'clock. Take a adjournment. We'll get to second hearings adjourned.